Joining me now to talk more about Bolton, Israel and Israeli politics, Shai. He's a Middle East analyst, partner at Gotham Government Relations and a former executive of the World Jewish Congress. Here in studio with me, David Rubin. He is the former mayor of Shiloh in Israel and the author of the book, Trump and the Jews. And still with us is Asaf Romirowsky from the Middle East Forum. Good to have you all with us. David, I'd like to start with you. Bolton, clearly a huge supporter of the state of Israel. In fact, he was given a helicopter tour of the Jordan Valley, which Prime Minister Netanyahu said today will become fully Israeli and if he annexes it and if he'll extend Israeli sovereignty over it. So he probably would have supported that move. What is your take on how Bolton's departure could impact Israel?
Well, Bolton was certainly a great friend of Israel. There's no question about that. But President Trump is also a great friend of Israel. And if we look at President Trump's accomplishments, from the recognizing sovereignty over the Golan Heights, Jerusalem, cutting off funding for the PLO, this is all tremendous. So, yes, it's sad to see him go, but obviously President Trump needs to have a staff that he can work with.
So you don't think that this means anything in terms of the Trump administration's position regarding Israel and the many threats that it faces, of course, Iran being one of them?
Most likely not.
Okay. All right. Asaf, Bolton was regarded as a hawk, as we know. Many are very happy to see him go, including Senator Rand Paul. He was saying that the threat of war worldwide has now gone down exponentially with John Bolton out of the White House. But Asaf, as we know, sometimes you need the threat of war to keep the peace. Do you think Bolton's departure may embolden the U.S.'s and Israel's enemies?
Well, I think that the target has always been the United States at large. Bolton has been a symbol of what they perceive to be as hawkish policies. But I think that Bolton is a huge loss for, from the administration, in the sense that Bolton has had a significant amount of experience in the Middle East, going back to the days of involvement with Zionism as racism and repealing that with James Baker, going back to his role with the General Assembly as far as the UN ambassador, the United States ambassador to the United Nations. And I think that he understands the nuances of what the Middle East is actually facing today. While the administration and the president has been very favorable towards Israel, you also need to have good advisors in that regard. And I think in that regard, Bolton represents a loss. To that end, I think that, again, the animosity is going to continue whether or not Bolton is there or not there. And what you're going to see is more of a continuation of what the people who oppose the administration see as bad policies in the region. I'm also concerned personally the fact that you're seeing Bolton's departure and you're also seeing Greenblatt's departure vis-a-vis the peace process. Both individuals have been immersed in this process, and there's a question for the Israelis about continuance and steady people they can talk to all along.
Right. Well, Shai, to Asaf's point, if nothing else, is a loss of continuity. What do you think are the consequences for Israel and the Middle East with Bolton's departure?
I think since the Trump administration came in, there's actually been a break in continuity. For 30, 40 years, actually, there was a continuity of U.S. policy in the Middle East, and with respect to Israel, there were shifts. But now, many people in Israel might say this is a positive break. The moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the annexation of the Golan Heights, cutting off assistance to the Palestinians, cutting off assistance to UNRWA. Those are already breaks. I don't think it affects the overall policy toward Israel. It will affect Trump's. Look, I don't think if Bolton had stayed in, he would be able to stop Trump from wanting to meet with Rouhani and actually meeting with Rouhani possibly later this month in New York. But it is a reflection, perhaps, that the main precipitating factor for Bolton's departure was Trump's idea to bring the Taliban to Camp David, a terrorist organization that has not renounced terrorism. So if that's his approach, then President Trump will I think we can predict that if Rouhani is willing to meet with him in New York or wherever, Trump will go ahead. He already did that in North Korea. As you recall, at the DMZ, Bolton did not attend that meeting. He went to Mongolia. That's a real excuse.
Well, the president has long maintained that he is willing to meet Iran without any preconditions, that he's willing to sit down and just have a talk with Iran's President Rouhani. We did hear from U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Steve Mnuchin about what this could mean for Iran policy, and both insisted that the maximum pressure on Iran will continue. Let's watch.
I would say Secretary Pompeo and myself and the president are completely aligned on our maximum pressure campaign. I think, we've done more sanctions on Iran than anybody, and it's absolutely working. Now, the president has made clear he's happy to take a meeting with no preconditions, but we are maintaining the maximum pressure campaign.
David, what do you read into that? Do you have any concerns that a meeting between the president and President Rouhani may somehow land up in the Trump administration softening their position on Iran?
No. First of all, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the meeting is even going to happen because Rouhani is opposing it. He has all of these preconditions. President Trump said very clearly he's willing to sit with anybody, but with no preconditions. And when Trump says something, he sticks to it. His word is his word. As he says, promises kept. And it's not just a slogan. We've seen that from the beginning of his administration.
All right. Who do you think, Asaf, is most likely to replace Bolton? And is that going to be potentially any kind of foreign policy shift? Is the selection going to let us know where the president's head is at?
Well, there are different, as mentioned before. I mean, there were different, individuals that were mentioned. One individual that was not mentioned before by your correspondent was the ambassador to Germany, Gurnell, who's been a pretty staunch supporter of the administration, a solid diplomat, and I think would be a good individual in that regard as far as the imagery for the administration. I think that, again, we've seen that a lot of the marching orders come directly out of the Oval Office. If there are personality issues that we've seen all along, those individuals don't last very long, as we've seen now exercised between Trump and John Bolton. To that end, I think that there is a consistent policy as far as trying to reestablish America's role in the region at large as it relates to Sunnis and Shiites, as what we've seen as far as reestablishing those ties with the Sunni countries and with Israel that has not been happening, that did not happen under the Obama administration. And of course, the fact that the number one destabilizing factor is the Islamic Republic of Iran. To that end, I think that, we've seen pretty much a consistent message coming out of that. So regardless of who the individual is going to be, it's going to have to work well with the president himself and, and by extension Pompeo, as far as what you're seeing as far as the diplomatic architecture that has been put forth.
David, we do know that Bolton was advocating for a military response towards Iran on a number of instances. Certainly when Iran took down a U.S. drone, we have indications that he wanted the U.S. to retaliate to that action to deter Iran from any further attempts to attack U.S. assets. Does it indicate that this is clearly a position that the Trump administration is against now, any kind of military action or a cyber attack, because that Bolton is gone? Does this signal something in terms of a diplomatic approach versus a different kind of approach?
Not necessarily. You have to remember that Bolton was a classic hawk, sort of in the mold of a John McCain. He would advocate a military response in most situations. And Trump is out of the box. We have to always remember that. Trump is not dogmatic. He came into office promising that he was going to withdraw troops from certain places. He wasn't going to get involved in conflict unless he felt that it could serve American interests. But he said that if he does get involved, he's going to get involved in a big way. So I think Iran is a story that is continuing, and it's an ongoing process. He's ratcheted up the sanctions on Iran, right. and there is a lot of pressure on Iran, and there is that open question out there whether either Israel or the United States or some combination of the two, or perhaps others, maybe even the Saudis, will get involved in launching a military strike on Iran at some point.
All right, thank you so much, David Rubin. Appreciate it. Asaf Romirowsky and Shai Franklin, thank you all for joining us.